Hi, I'm Brett. I'm the Mensa mechanic. Today we are going to replace the front coil spring in a 1967 Mustang. Alright, here's the replacement coil spring right here. And if you're going to replace the spring, replace the seat at the top too. It's a rubber piece. Goes in here. And when you compress a coil spring, this is just the spring, you want to use an inside the spring compressor. That's what this one does. It goes inside the spring and compresses it from the inside, as opposed to an outside the spring compressor. That's what this is. An outside the spring compressor compresses it from the outside of the spring. These are used on almost every vehicle today that has McPherson strut suspension. These are used to get those McPherson struts out. But 1967 doesn't have McPherson struts, just straight old coil springs with a shock inside. Use an inside the coil compressor. So you need to take the tire off, obviously, to get the spring out. You've got to release the load on the spring. And never work on a car that's been jacked up and it's being held up by the jack. Use a jack stand. That's not cool. That thing's acting like it's been cross-threaded. Yeah, I broke it right off. Figures. I got something else to fix. Alright, step one. Got to pull the shock out. The top of the shock. 2 1/2-inch bolts right there. I put these QA1s on here a while ago because they're adjustable. Right there's the adjuster. Let me adjust the rate at which they're allowed to compress. I'm trying to put stiffness up here so that the smallest of bumps don't cause the tire to hit against this inside rim like this. It's been chewing on the tires over the years, and the spring, as they've sagged, now there's only 3/4 of an inch clearance between the top of the tire and this surface here, and it has chewed into the tire. Now, one thing you can get, if you've got, because I put wider tires on here and I didn't do a good enough job of figuring out what the offset needed to be for the wheel to push the tire further this way, and so enough of it sticks out here that it contacts this area up in here. And you can get this tool from Eastwood that curls this lip over, but that's something you want to do before you paint, I think. And I didn't know about it until after I had painted the car. But it has chewed into the edge of the tread at the top here, so I'm just trying to restore the ride height with the springs to give me a little extra stiffness. The springs I'm using are a variable rate. The further they compress, the stiffer they get, and so hoping that gives me a little more stiffness in the front end to keep the tires from hitting here. Anyway, we've got to get the bottom of the shock off now, but this needs to be raised because the coil at its full extension is longer than the shock, and so I'll unscrew this and the shock will come right out. And so what we need to do is, I usually just take the bottle jack, and we're not going to jack the car up. Don't take the weight off of the jack stand, just jack up the suspension. Find a spot. Under the lower control arm somewhere, that's all you need to do. And just jack it up, just enough. Just to get see, the car isn't moving, but the control arm is. Just get that spring compressed a little bit to reduce its overall length. But I'm going to have to use a wrench on this one, at least to get it started. It's 9/16 wrench size. Yeah. All right, now the shock is disconnected completely, but we got to get it outside that spring. Normally the shock would just pull right through here, but not this QA1, it won't. So this top mounting bracket has to come off too. 3 bolts hold it on, they're 9/16. The engine in this car is a 363. It is built on a Ford Racing Boss 302 block, iron block, and it is able to be bored out to 4125. The standard 302 block can be bored out to 4, and then 2 oversizes, 4030 and 4060. So the standard size on this is 4125. So you pick up and you run a 347 rotating assembly in here, 3.4-inch length rods, and normally you would get 347 cubic inches with a first oversized 302 block bored at 4.03, but with this board at 4125 and the same rotating assembly, you get 363 cubic inches. But for all intents and purposes, this is a 302 block, so it's a small block. Ford, the springs you get are based on the engine size, therefore, which is also the engine weight. This particular block or engine altogether should weigh less than a standard 302 did back in the day, because it's got an aluminum manifold, aluminum heads, and also an aluminum flywheel. But the heads in the manifold, you know, swap out aluminum for what originally came as cast iron, and that's quite a weight difference. So these springs should be more than adequate for this. You get springs that are rated too high, and the front end's going to sit way up. It's not going to compress at all, or barely compress. So you do have to get the right springs for the engine you've got in the car. So make sure you know which engine you've got and you order the right springs for it. There are some springs that are designed to lower the ride height that obviously don't work for me, because I need to keep the ride height up above the tires so they don't hit the tires. And there are some springs that, you know, you're supposed to cut the springs to adjust to the ride height you want. That sounds like a lot of work. As you'll see, once we put this spring in here, it is a lot of work to get the spring in and out of this car. So, you know, I certainly wouldn't want to be doing a lot of trial and error, playing around with ride height, trying to figure out what the right ride height is by how much spring I cut off. So I just bought stock ride height springs. All right, this thing is called the export brace. It's just reinforcement on this shock tower, spring tower. But you're probably going to have to pry it off gently. You don't have to put a lot of pressure on it to get it off of these studs. There, it's off. Remember, it goes on top of this bracket, not underneath of it. Should be obvious by the way it's formed. Lift it up enough. You don't have to unbolt the other end. Just lift this up enough to get this bracket free, and then pull the shock out. And if you feel like threading the needle, just kind of twists and turns, and eventually you can kind of get it through the housing here. There. So set it aside. It will go back in. Now the fun part. So here's the spring. And it is still, even though the suspension is at its full travel, the spring is still under compression. So you can't just take it out of there, obviously. We have to compress it further, and we'll use the spring compressor for that. So as I mentioned, we use an inside the spring compressor. The thing that you just kind of, you know, tighten as if you were tightening this, that draws this together, these two pieces together, kind of from above. Slide it down in there. What I'm trying to do is walk him up the spring, the top guy. Now it is seated. Take this part slowly. Make sure that top is still seated. Yeah, it is. All right, now just compress away. Alright, so the spring tension or the compression of it's been released because it's compressed under this compressor right now. But as it released, this suspension moved up and reduced the area that we had to get the spring out of here. So why did it move up? Well, it moved up because of this thing right here. This is called the anti-roll bar. What's its job? It is a spring in and of itself. It's a thick metal rod. It goes underneath the car and it bolts right here through this series of bushings and this link to the lower control arm. And so it connects the lower control arm of one side of the car to the lower control arm of the other side of the car. And it is a spring, as I mentioned, but it is a torsional spring, which means it springs based on trying to twist the bar. And torsional stiffness of a bar is related to the fourth power of its cross-sectional diameter. So the thicker the bar, the much stiffer it is in torsion. And so basically what it's doing is, as that side compresses, that compression is transmitted through the torsion of this bar over to this side, and it compresses this side. And why do you want that? If your car is cornering left and the weight of the car wants to continue forward and it pushes the outside wheel into compression, the inside wheel goes into extension here because the weight's coming off of the spring. So as it goes into extension on an extreme case, it can actually be lifted off the road. And now instead of two tires having traction, you only have one tire, and maybe not even that full tire if it rolls up on its side a little bit. And so to keep this tire in contact with the road, some of that compression over there is transmitted over this side to keep this tire also compressed so it doesn't come up and lose traction. So it keeps the weight even, stops the car from wanting to roll, right? Anti-roll. So it's trying to stop the car from wanting to roll by keeping the car flat in the turn as opposed to letting that weight roll the car. And it does that by compressing the other side. So it's working right now. It's compressing this side, or actually moving this side up, because that's under compression, because we've jacked this side of the car up, we've lifted and transmitted some of the weight to the other side of the car. So, little trick here is we don't have to take it all the way off, but just unbolt this. This is a 9/16. It's just a rod all the way through, a threaded rod, and a 9/16 at the top. Let's just release it and watch the lower suspension come down, the whole suspension come down. Like I said, we don't have to release it all the way, but just enough to give us some clearance up here that we can get this spring in and out of there. And if it's extreme, we'll release it all the way. But yeah, this bar right here is causing this whole suspension to rise as a result, because it's being compressed on the other side. And that's why if you want performance, you get a thicker bar, because it offers more stiffness. It's not going to twist. It's going to transmit all of that compression to the other side. But you can go too far to the extreme where it actually does lift the wheel up off the ground because it compresses too much. And so there's a balance that you look for the proper stiffness and leverage one tire to the next to kind of keep that car flat in the turns, but without overdoing it too much to cause the wheel actually lift off the ground. So let's see if we got enough clearance now. Yep, there's the spring. But now that it's out, we can release. Again, be careful with these springs. Release the compression of the spring. All right, there's the one that came off the car. There's the other one that came off the car. Here's the one that's going on the car. I measured on the other side of the car. It's about 3/4 of an inch difference in height, because this has just sagged over the years. Like I said, I hope it's been a lot of years. And if there's any of that original rubber gasket still remaining at the top, peel that off. It's kind of self-evident how these things go on. Because it's molded to kind of agree with the way the spring is designed. Obviously, before we put the spring back in, we got to compress it. So we want this as low in the spring as we can get, not so low that when it gets compressed that this rod extends down to where it's going to interfere with the seat of the spring uppers, and as low as we can get the bottom one. So we have the spring full compressed enough that we can get it in the car. Looks good. It's probably as much as we're going to be able to get it because of this, where this is. It's going to start interfering with the seat at the bottom. So let's see if this is enough. Yep, got it. There's a spot on this saddle right there where the end of the spring is supposed to rest, just like that. That's how you want to orient the spring when you put it in. That's it right there. That's the stop for the spring. Make sure the spring ends there. And I'll put it in. Slowly uncompress the spring while guiding it. As you turn this thing, it's going to want to turn the spring. And so kind of have to carefully hold the spring where it belongs. And we've got to get the top in there too. Feels like it's right where it's supposed to be. So make sure the spring stays where it's supposed to be down here. Now let's rotate it. Now that's where it's supposed to be. All right, now we're just gonna guide it. Slowly decompress it and guide it. All right, there we go. Spring's in. Spring. Get the spring tool out. Get the shock back in, and we're good to go. All right, coil spring compressor back together. All right, there the spring's in. Now, it's not a horrible job. I made it a little more horrible because I broke the stud off. I had no choice because this was cross-threaded. It wasn't coming off. That either means a new rotor. I think these things are pressed in, so if I can bang that out and buy a new one and press it through, I don't have to buy a rotor. I'm pretty sure they're pressed in from the back, but I do have to take the rotor off, which isn't a fun job in and of itself because you got pulled caliper. That's a different job for later. Right now, let's get the shock back in. All right, we get the fun of threading the needle with this again. Easier for some reason going back in than it was coming out. Put this forward on this particular, you can get to it to adjust the shocks. The export brace goes under this bracket. The order in which you put the shock back in does matter. Top in last, bottom in first. But let's get this bracket down first. And actually, I think I'm going to hold off on the bracket, just snug it a little bit. I won't tighten it down until I got the top shock tightened down. And if you remember, it's not going to go very far into here, not far enough to get anything threaded through until we compress this spring again. So back to our little bottle jack here, which is good news because that's what we wanted. Rubber washers in first. You can kind of see the way it was bolted in before, like that. So we'll go with the same way. Metal washer next, followed by the nut. These are self-locking nuts, so the locking side is out. Tell you what, before we do this, it might help to retighten the anti-roll bar. So let's do that. Matter of fact, let's take the jack out of the equation for now. Retighten the anti-roll bar. That's tight again. I can jack this thing back up. Now see if I've got access to that back nut. Okay, this one. top of the shock. In which case we're going to have to pry a little bit to get these puppies lined up. One. Two. All right, shock's back in, springs in. Normally we put the tire back on, let the car down, and we're done. Except we made a pain in the butt job, pain in the butt here, by breaking off a stud. So got no choice. Next, that'll be a different thing. Take off the caliper, remove the dust cap. This rotor goes on, unlike newer cars, which the rotor's just a disc that slips over the hub assembly. This is the hub assembly with the rotor as part of it. So we've got to take the bearings out. I guess we'll repack the bearings while we have it apart. And I think this presses in. So just press it out and get a new one and press a new one in. That's a different video. All right, that's it. Springs in. Old springs are out. Hopefully these will improve the ride height, keep the wheels from hitting the inside of the fender. Thanks for watching.